focus for today's session is all going to be around how to implement program management practices across distributed and remote teams. I'll be handing any kind of Q&A as well towards the back end of the session. But just to wrap a little bit more context around who Godel are as a business. So we're a nearshore software delivery partner, headquartered here in Manchester in the UK. The whole kind of focus of what we do is building long-term strategic partnerships with the likes of with Compare the Market, with Booking.com, Trainline from some of those key examples. How we actually go about doing that is by augmenting highly skilled engineering pods that complement internal teams' existing delivery, with a key focus of giving CTOs predictability around quality, scale, and cost. But today, I'll be sharing kind of some conversation with Jon today, and really good to kind of have him today for the next kind of 45, 50 minutes, where I'll be talking through his experiences at Deliveroo and with a topic that's very close to his heart. So I'll kindly hope you hand over now to Jon to introduce himself, and then we'll dive into the content and then cover the Q&A at the end. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, David. I'm going to go ahead and take over the screen here if I can. And okay, so with any luck, you guys are probably looking at a desk. Okay, so with any luck, you guys are now looking at the opening slide of this talk. So someone just give me a shout out if you're not, but I think you're fine. So hi everybody, my name is Jon Thomas. This talk is actually about an hour and a half long, so I'm going to go through it as fast as I can to make sure that we get room at the end, and I can go back and talk about anything specific that you want. But it's sort of an addition to a talk that I usually give on sort of what I do and how I help businesses and software development organizations to grow. But then I've bolted on at the end some stuff that's really specific to stuff that's happened this year. So the first question you guys may have is, who am I, right? So my name is Jon Thomas. Most people call me JT because there's usually too many Johns in the room. But I've been writing software since 1996 when I started. All sorts of stuff, worked on a book, wrote a book for Wiley a long time ago. Basically, I've been leading teams since '98. I have directly led teams between like 5 and 50 people, probably more like 3 and 60. And I actually ran an entire professional services organization for the West Coast of a very large company for a while. So both direct and indirectly managing people, and managing people in lots and lots of different sort of scenarios, remote situations, on site at different customers, lots of scenarios. I did move one point that will come up later in this conversation is that for a short period of time, and trying to sort of round my understanding of the software industry, I actually did work in software sales for a company called Pivotal, so that I could better understand how to put stuff together. So now I understand just about everything about how a deal is put together from a software company. I did move to Amazon in 2016, which brought me over here to the UK in 2017. And in January, I joined Deliveroo. My Peloton hashtag is out there if anybody wants to join me on rides, and I love driving my Model 3 around the UK. So, quick plug for the people I work for because I love them. Deliveroo, it's our mission to become the world's definitive food company. There's lots of history all over the place, so in the interest of time, I won't inundate you with it, but suffice it to say that Deliveroo is one of the few companies that could actually pull me away from Amazon, because I was very excited about their mission and their approach, and the fact that they're a young company. We're a young company who is really handling things truly like a tech company. We're really building software in what I think is the right way in a lot of ways. So I was very excited to be here, and obviously it's grown into a very big business. In Deliveroo Tech, there's about 350 of us. Most of us are located here in the city of London, as well as having engineering teams in Edinburgh and New York. We're composed of cross-functional teams. We have product management, experience, data science, analytics. We all normally sit together in this beautiful scene that you see here. That's what's called the Roo pitch, where we have our company meetings. And around it in the space that you can see is just a wide open space where we all sit together and solve problems together. It's just a fantastic place to work. So that's my pitch. If you're interested, let me know. It's a great place to work. I love working there, and I'm so happy that I came over. Now, what do I do? Why do I get hired? Why do I have conversations like this? It's because I do what I've been doing since the early 2000s, which is basically I've been helping startups survive their initial success. Right. And what I mean by that is that as a startup, you build some stuff and all of a sudden you have more customers than you ever anticipated. Now you're successful. And that's probably one of the hardest things to survive as a software company, is surviving that initial success and being able to grow into a larger company and do it in a way that you don't lose all the values and all of the value that you have created in the time that you were there while you can still grow into the company that you want to be. So I do that by building high performance software teams. It started out that we were just a bunch of guys and girls building cool software the way that we wanted to, right? And then it turned out that we were drawing people to us because we were doing really cool stuff. And that turned into people starting to hire me to draw people to their company. So I do that by building high performance software teams. And a big thing that I do is I encourage software engineering career paths. This is actually what drew me to FANG companies. And by FANG, I mean Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. And Microsoft usually gets included in there, right? But what drew me to these companies working with and in them is that these companies take software first and they build solutions using software rather than saying, okay, we've got a solution, let's go hire some software people. They put that at the core of what they do. And as a result, you get whole software engineering career paths that are just, they're fantastic, varied career paths that software engineers can take that they can grow into. And I've told people who want to become software engineering leaders for years that in my mind, the best engineering leaders are engineers who've been poorly led in the past. So I really believe in building engineering careers in what I do. I also deliver high impact, well-designed products. I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't do that, then it doesn't matter what else you do. You can build great teams, you can have happy people, you can build careers. If you're not building high impact, well-designed software, then there's no point in doing what you do. And finally, this is what I want to focus on today. One of the big things that I've done, especially in the last 10 years or so, is working with companies that want to alter how they build software. They want to improve how they're building software, both culturally and organizationally, to get better results, right? So in this case, moving out of a culture of heroic product development, which is how people get that initial success, to one of being able to sustain growth by defining, and the way that I do that, and this is really important because this is what we'll talk about here, is by defining and measuring strategic goals and initiatives. And you do that so that as you grow into multiple teams, you've got this framework that allows multiple teams to be working toward and working toward the same strategic initiatives and rowing in the same direction. And if you can do that, then you can actually take that success that you've had with one or two teams and scale it across to be really, really effective. So, next slide. How do we do that? Well, we have to define effective goals in order to be able to grow, right? And those goals have to be levers to our strategic initiatives. I'll go into some of these terms in a minute, but if we're going to define goals that will allow us to grow from a startup into a strategically growing organization, we have to define goals that are levers to strategic initiatives. We have to ensure that we have a consistent way to track progress across teams. As we grow into multiple teams, we have to be able to know that we're now looking, instead of looking at one or two teams that we can dive deep in all the time, we've got 10 teams. How do we know that those 10 teams are actually effectively working toward the same goals and we can measure them easily using the same mechanisms? We have to effectively measure and learn from both success and failure. I mean, this seems like it would go without saying, but if you're not really, really conscientious about how you do this, it just won't happen. So you've got to put stuff in place in order to be able to do that, which actually takes us to the next one, which is you have to ensure that you have mechanisms versus good intentions in your software engineering and your program management process. And what I mean by that is that everybody wants to do the right thing. Most of us have had some experience with success or even read about how to get some success, right? But if you don't put mechanisms in place, then you'll have good intentions to do it, and you can easily be distracted and lose track of getting those results. So you have to have mechanisms versus good intentions. And then finally, you have to understand as you grow, especially into multiple regions, that the people that you're working with, especially on remote teams, communicate and value different things. So when you're having these larger conversations about aligned strategic initiatives and goals, you have to realize that the people that you're talking to may actually get your message differently than you're intending it to. And you want to be really, really intentional about that, especially in the new normal that we're in right now. So we'll talk about each of these right now. So what are the strategic initiatives that I keep talking about? Well, strategic initiatives, you can think of them as company level goals. And they can be for up to a year, they can be longer, they can be shorter, depending on what you're trying to achieve. But they have some criteria. They need to be BHAGs, right? And by BHAGs, the friendly way to say that is that they need to be big, hairy, and audacious goals, right? They need to be something that is really, really all-encompassing for your company. And they need to be something that should be inspiring. It's going to make the people in your company see that and just want to go out and change the world, or at least your world as a company, right? One really key important factor is that they should be, everyone in your company should be able to tell you what initiative they're working towards. Even if they're working on a small product piece or a small piece of software, they need to be able to tell you across the entire company, across all your teams, across all your regions, what initiative are they building towards? And we'll talk about those in a minute. And then they need to be challenging, right? So a lot of people will set goals that are achievable, right? One of the great things I learned at Amazon is to set stretch goals. Set goals that you don't think can be achieved. Take the goal that you think you can hit and make it 5x, right? Make it 10x. Make it something really, really big. And if you do that, I have literally seen miracles happen where I had a manager at Amazon who had us take the goal that I had written and multiply it by 10. And somehow that year we hit that goal because the team got creative and was able to really, really drive toward that goal. So a way to think about that is that for strategic initiatives, just say to yourself, if we do nothing else this year, we should what? We should, examples are increase revenue, reduce costs, sell more units, grow our customer base, right? These strategic initiatives are what your goals are going to tie to as you grow into these multiple teams. So now let's get into what the goals are. Well, first, the components of strategic initiatives. I'm going to go through this really fast because we could spend an hour on these components, but I need to get to the goals. So the components of a strategic initiative are, first, they have to have output metrics. This is the big needle you want to move with this goal. It might be increased revenue, right? It might be lower cost. This is the big output that you want to achieve from this goal. The next thing you need in a strategic initiative is you need input metrics. And these are the things that you're going to increase revenue by doing this. So this is the thing that's going to drive that output metric, is the input metric. And then your lever, or your lever if you're British, is the combination of those two. It's I'm going to increase revenue, my output metric, by adding more customers, my input metric, right? So now you have a lever that you say, by adding new customers, I'm going to increase revenue. And then you need ramps. This is something that a lot of people don't put in, but they're really important for a lot of reasons. Your ramp is going to say that I'm going to achieve this over time, and here are some milestones I should be looking for. Not hold myself to, not kill the whole project if I'm not making them, but know where I should be at any given time. So a good example is we have a strategic initiative to increase revenue by 50% year on year in 2020, right? From 250 to 375 million between these dates, right? And that can actually be summarized really, really simply as we're going to grow revenue by 1.5x in 2020, right? And that's the thing that your teams will remember, is that simple version of it. Now your output metric there is your yearly revenue. Your input metric can be on any goal. It can be pricing, it can be selection, it can be costs, it can be customer base, it can be increasing retention through repeated business. Any of those can be your input metrics. Your levers are where you put them together. You say we're going to increase orders by X% in order to raise revenue. We're going to raise revenue by reducing costs by Y% or adding Z% new customers. Right? That's your lever, the combination of those two. And then your ramp, what you're going to do is you're going to say, we know that we're not going to have a linear growth through the year, that we're going to get to that 1.5x, right? What we're going to do is we're going to start building software early. So maybe in January, we've only got a 1% increase. In June, we'll have built some software and we'll start to see increases from that. So we'll be at about 30%. But as that software starts to roll and gets adopted more and more, then it's really going to increase. So you start to see a curve there in terms of your ramp to achieving that goal. And by September, you're at 70%, and hopefully you've blown it out by the end of the year. So that's what your ramp is. And that's really important, because what you're going to find is that as you get into that year, you get late in that year, you may think, I'm never going to make this goal. But because your other senior leaders are going to see that ramp, your senior engineers, your designers, your product people are going to come to you and they're going to say, hey, we're never going to hit it this way. But if we change this and this and this, we can actually hit that strategic initiative. So now they're not tunnel vision on the goal or the project they're working on. Because they're aware of the strategic initiative, they're going to find new ways, and they're going to help you ideate on how to change and how to move forward. So then the components of a good goal. Now we're going from the strategic initiative to defining the goal itself, right? And this could be a quarterly goal. It could be a launch goal to build something. It could be any of these. But the components of a good goal, or the first, is that it has to tie to a strategic initiative or more than one strategic initiative. You could be building software that's going to reduce costs and increase revenue. So you want to tie to at least one strategic initiative. The next thing you want to do is you want to have very clearly defined success criteria. Make it clear so that it's unambiguous whether we made it, because people get really creative at the end of the year trying to prove that they made a goal, even if they kind of didn't. The next thing is measurement. This is really important. Define this up front. If you say we're going to hit this success criteria, but you don't know before you start how you're going to measure it, then you're opening yourselves up to all sorts of ambiguity. And that doesn't scale well. That takes you back into that startup mode where you're just sort of reactively building. You want to define how you're going to measure success up front before you start. Leave room for creative solutions. This is a really pet peeve of mine as an engineer, right? If a product manager comes to me and says, I want to improve this, so build me a messaging service that's going to send messages to the customer, right? It's probably a great solution, but you've now constrained my whole engineering team to doing exactly what you told me to do, as opposed to telling me what you want to achieve. I want to build something that's going to let our customers know when something goes wrong in the middle of their order so that they can take action before it fails and fix it. Now, in the end, that may end up being a messaging service, but if you define the goal open enough that we can change how we approach over time, we can pivot as we go, then it makes it a lot easier for the engineering team or the product team or the design team to come up with new ideas if it's not working out or if we get blocked on something. So don't be super specific, leave room for the team to figure out what to do, right? And then let's see, due date. You got to have a due date on there. And here's a pro tip, right? Most teams, when they start doing this, especially when they start implementing these types of goals and they've never done them before, what you're going to find is if you've got a quarterly goal, the due date's always going to be the end of the quarter. And so if a team takes like 3 goals, you've got 3 goals that all have due dates at the end of the quarter, which means that they're either completely disconnected from the actual schedule that they're building them in, and you can't make priority decisions that way, or they're going to be killing themselves at the end of the quarter in order to get stuff done, right? Either way, it's suboptimal. So take the time when you look at these goals to say, if we're going to have 2 goals for the quarter, when are we going to try to get them done? You can always change your mind, but set those due dates so that you know and that you've set a framework for what you're going to try to achieve in what order. And then list the dependencies, right? So a good example is if I have a goal to launch a service, right? Then in the goal, I'm going to show you here an example. There's a launch goal and there's an output metric, right? So in this particular goal example that I'm giving, right, the summary is to increase customer base by 10% by implementing a no-cost onboarding option for our service, right? I'll get back to the dependencies when I get to there. But then the strategic initiative that ties to is a larger initiative across the company to increase the customer base by 20%, right? So this goal becomes a lever to that strategic initiative, right? Now we're gonna get 10% of that 20% through this goal in this quarter, right? The next thing is how we measure it. You're going to come up with some sort of a metric that's going to say, this is how we're going to measure the success of this, right? Then you're going to have success criteria. And the success criteria is twofold in this case. The first thing is to launch a service. And then the second thing is to use that service to drive customer adoption, right? To get new customers onboarded using that service, which you're then going to measure, right? Now, I was talking about listing your dependencies. In this case, you've got a launch goal and you've got a moving metric. That moving metric can't possibly move until the launch goal is done. So once that launch goal is done, in this example, I said, okay, we're going to have a dependency on the marketing team, because once we've launched this service, the marketing team has got to get the word out that this service exists to get the adoption, right? So we can hit one of our goals, which is the launch goal, but we can't actually hit our larger output metric goal without this dependency on the marketing team. Now, the reason you put that in the goal is that when we build this reporting system that's going to tell us the status of our goals, you want that to be apparent. You want it to be very transparent to anybody looking at it, that the overall success of this goal has a dependency on the marketing team in order to take this adoption, in order to, I should say, push this adoption to get it done, right? That way, we're not at the last minute playing the blame game or running around saying we didn't let you know. You've got to have those dependencies listed in the goal. The one final thing I'm going to call out here, because I didn't have time to fix it, is if you're like me and you're looking at the details, you'll see that my measurement is bad maths. I know, I just didn't have time to go back and fix it, but I'm not actually doing the percentages right there. So kudos to you if you noticed it. My wife said I shouldn't say that, but I did. Okay, so consistently track progress against teams, right? This is the second step. The first step was to create strategic initiatives and goals to work with those strategic initiatives. The second step is to track progress against teams. I'm going to speed up a little bit here, but you're going to get the idea of everything that I'm talking about. You need to create a unified view. So you've got all these teams that are now working on their own goals, and those goals map to strategic initiatives. You need a unified way to look at that. The teams are all going to record their work differently. They're all going to track their progress differently. So you need to create a framework that shows you very simply, here's the goal, here's the initiative that it's tied to, and here is where we are in the status of it. So define statuses in clear definitions. If one team says that they're 40% of the way done with their goal and another team says that we're green for our goal, that doesn't help you as a leader know where to plug in. On top of that, like something like saying we're 40% done with your goal, when you really start to dig into that, you're going to find that you have all sorts of questions that have to be answered to get that. So I try to come up with really simple statuses: gray, green, yellow, red, and blue. Gray means I haven't started yet. Green means I'm on track. Yellow means I'm not on track, but I know how I'm going to get on track. Red means I'm not on track, I have no idea, I need help. And blue means I'm done building stuff and I'm now measuring the impact to see if it works, right? It's important to note that this is not about how they build the product. This is about how you report the product. Don't get it tied up with how we build the product. Let them build the product the way they need to. Build a simple framework that will allow them to report on status consistently across all of the teams. And then remove layers of management from reporting status, and do this rigorously and conscientiously, right? Managers' jobs should never be to monopolize upward communication. Managers' job should be to build up the people that work for them and build new leaders. So use them to teach the people building the software, building the product, how to communicate upwardly, right? So make it very transparent in your reporting, who's working on what, and give them opportunities to report their own status. It will also increase their ownership of the things that they're working on, right? Build a fearless reporting culture where people are not afraid to escalate blockers and headwinds. Again, you're gonna, depending on the culture that you're in, you're gonna run into people who are very risk averse or are very afraid of saying that something's going wrong. And you've got to create a culture where people can say up front that we're gonna be blocked on this, or we're gonna have a problem. And ideally what you wanna do is you wanna build it in so that they don't even have to say it, so that it becomes apparent looking at the goal that they're blocked on something, and you as a leader can plug in and see that. Finally, categorize goals in terms of importance and risk so that senior leaders know where to invest their time. Make it so that a senior leader can say, show me all of the goals that are red, or show me all of the goals that are tied to this strategic initiative. And we'll get to why that's so important when we talk about 2020. So the next thing is effectively measure and learn from both successes and failures. There are lots of ways to do this, but it's really important. Define, as I said before, define how the success will be measured before the goal gets started. Evaluate the measurement for multi-dipping. This is important when you're growing across teams. You just said you have this big strategic initiative and you have lots of goals from different teams that are trying to achieve that. If the measurement isn't right, then what's going to happen is team A is going to say, I increased revenue by X% with this thing that I built. And team B is going to say, this marketing strategy I have increased revenue by that same percent, because they both have that goal. And they're both going to see the metric saying that revenue's gone up. And they're going to say, that's attributable to what I did. You need to have data scientists or data analysts involved from the very beginning to say, how are we going to measure the attribution of this effort in terms of the revenue, right? And there's lots of strategies to do that. At Deliveroo, we have a whole team of data scientists that focus on that, but it's really important to think about that if you're going to have these cross-team goals and you're going to grow to a place where you can trust their outputs. The next piece, back to the fearless reporting culture. Again, just make sure that people aren't afraid to report challenges, and build mechanisms so that those blockers and headwinds become self-evident, right? And blockers are obviously blocking you. Headwinds are things that are slowing you down or could be blocking you in the future. Learning from missteps is the key of any successful organization. I'll talk about that in a little bit with mechanisms. And then build a retro culture. Make sure that they're in there. Those meetings tend to get dropped when other stuff comes up. Make sure that you are retroing at every level of your organization, even if it's a simple agile retro with 3 columns, one with a happy face, one with a meh face, and one with a sad face. And people have the opportunity to put up what's working, what's sort of working or could be working soon, and what's not working. Make sure that gets done. That's how you're going to get most of your learning. If you get 1% better every week, you're 50% better at the end of the year. So, mechanisms versus good intentions. Liberally stolen from information that's out on the internet about what Amazon does and what they've done. There's a lot of talk about flywheels, but essentially what a mechanism's purpose is it's to say there's something that you want to achieve, and instead of just hoping that you'll achieve it or hoping that you've hired a bunch of smart people who will figure out to make it happen, you're going to put a mechanism in place to make sure that it happens, right? So examples of good mechanisms are, you may have heard of the Amazon bar raiser process, or one of them that I'm going to go over in a minute is what's called a correction of errors or a SEV retro process. And those are designed that you have this intention that you want to achieve, but if left to itself, it's not going to magically get better. So you're going to put things in place that will ensure that your entire organization across multiple teams, across multiple regions, is working together to get better. So looking at this, looking at the components of a mechanism and an example of that, right? The components of a mechanism, you start with an intention. This is something that we want to do, right? In this case, maybe it's to lessen the amount of time that our systems are down due to severe events in infrastructure. Then you build a tool to do it. In this case, it's going to be a postmortem or a correction of errors template. It's as simple as a document, right? That tool is just something that you use to consistently track the inputs of the thing that you want to improve on. Next, you're going to have adoption. You can build the tool, you can have the intention, but if you don't get everybody in your organization across all of the teams using this tool, then the mechanism is worthless, right? Because you built it, you're managing it, you're maintaining it, but nobody's using it. So you've got to get adoption for the mechanism to be worthwhile. And then finally, inspection. You need to make sure you're going in regularly and inspecting that mechanism to make sure that it's working, right? You may find that we can make improvements in it. You may find that it's just not working. A lot of mechanisms just need to be killed if they're not working for you, right? So have constant inspections on all of your mechanisms as you go forward. Here's an example of a mechanism pulled off the internet site that is in the link, it's in the slides. But essentially, this is just a document template for a correction of errors, which is designed to minimize the amount of time customers are impacted by infrastructure problems in a software company, right? So it just asks a bunch of questions. You know, who was involved in this? How did we find out about it? What was the root cause? We ask the 5 whys, which if you're familiar with engineering, the 5 whys are a chain of questions that you ask to get toward the root cause of a real problem, right? You ask how the issue was resolved, and then most importantly, in this mechanism, you list action items to say this process could have gone better if we did X, Y, and Z. And then you follow up on what those action items are as part of the mechanism. So that's an example of a mechanism. The idea, again, behind mechanisms is that you want to take those things that you want to do, and instead of trusting that you'll get them done, you want to put something as simple as a document in place to make sure that they're happening and assign an owner to that if possible. Okay, so now understanding the communication styles and cultural norms of remote teams. I'm going to go through this really quickly, but I want you guys to be aware of it, and you can look at it later or even ask me if you want. So this large company, who will go nameless, did a survey of all of their regions, and they surveyed how people communicate and what their teams value, and they came up with some really interesting insights that I want to share with you. So the first thing they said is, let's look at the difference between independence and interdependence. Do we value people who just go off and drive on their own, or people who really don't do that and are involved in group harmony? To some of you, this is going to sound like a no-brainer on either side, because to some of you, you value independence, and that's what makes you work. To others, it's like, no. Independence will get us down the wrong road. We need to have a culture where we build group harmony and consensus, right? So they asked all of the people in their different regions, which do you value more? They then went forward and said, equality versus status, egalitarianism versus status. Do we want a really flat hierarchy where everybody can get involved and do everybody else's job if they need to? Or do we want to have really defined roles and you never get outside your lane, right? The next thing they ask is risk versus certainty. Do we like taking risks? Do we love going out there and taking a big chance and killing ourselves to make it work? Or do we value sitting back, making sure we're doing the right thing, that we've thought through, we've done full risk analysis, right? And we know what we're building and we have a good estimate. And then they also ask direct versus indirect communication styles. As an American in Britain, I can tell you how important this is. The example that I give to my people all the time is in America, if your neighbor comes up to you and says, I love your dog, she is so energetic. What that means in America is, I love your dog, she is so energetic. What that means in the UK, where I live for the last 3 years, is, I hate your dog, it is so noisy, do something about it or I will take it into my own hands, right? Both of these are valid communication styles. Right? What it took me a long time to learn is that Brits communicate that way because it's polite. I'm not going to go out and say, I'm going to indicate to you what's going on so that you can fix it without me, getting in your face about it. It's very polite. To an American, it comes across as passive aggressive. We don't like that, right? We like somebody saying to us, your dog is too loud, because then we can understand where they're coming from and address it. So it's an example of communication styles, direct versus indirect. They asked everybody in their organization across the regions, what kind of communication do you actually prefer? And then value tasks versus relationships. Do you build your relationships by going through what we would call going through the trenches together, right? Building stuff together and you build your relationships that way? Or do you need to take time and build a relationship first so that you can trust someone enough to go build software? So they asked all of their countries this, and this is what they came up with. This matrix that you see, hopefully you can see it. If not, get the slides later and you'll look at it, is going to show that there are very strong differences between regions, between countries. And those strong differences are really, really important when you're communicating with your teams, when you're setting strategic initiatives and you're setting goals for those strategic initiatives, how you communicate the success criteria, how you communicate the status. You need to understand where people are coming from. And it's even more important now after COVID. And I'll get to that in a second. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move fast. So we just talked about how we define effective goals as we grow. This is what I've been doing for years. It's what I've done with very, very large organizations that I was a contractor for. It's what I've done with the organizations that I work for. I've learned a lot in a lot of the companies like Amazon where I've been, and it's what I do. And then came 2020. So I joined this new company. I was going through my normal process of let's look at what we can do. And here comes 2020. And it's going to throw as many curves and wrenches into my process as possible. So let's look at what happened, right? We get into 2020. I had some assumptions. I think they're probably similar to assumptions that most people had going into 2020 who were in senior leadership positions in software. I assumed that a relatively stable health and well-being of my workforce, right? So I knew that people would get sick. I knew that there would be problems, but for the most part, the majority inside the bell curve, people would be healthy and they would not be immediately impacted by healthcare problems, by pandemics. So I assumed that teams were working together in multiple different regions, different sites, but co-located, right? And that makes meetings different than everybody being separate, right? They would be I'd have a team sitting in a room in Singapore and a team sitting in a room in London, and we could have a conversation. I assumed a reasonably predictable marketplace. Deliveroo does great analysis. So I knew coming in that we had done our analysis. We knew what the marketplace looked like. We knew what food delivery looked like in all of the regions that we're in, and we had a plan for that, right? And we had a plan for that, which is relatively stable strategic initiatives, which had been done at Deliveroo. Again, huge kudos to Deliveroo. Those had been done before I ever joined the company. They knew what they wanted to achieve in 2020, and they had a good plan for it. So then also assuming reliable infrastructure, support teams, and products. Now, this is both the infrastructure that runs the software you're building and the infrastructure that's helping me talk to you right now, right? So I'm right now talking to you from my home in Cambridge over my own Virgin Wi-Fi connection, right? That was not what I thought we were going to be doing other than, work from home days. I thought I was going to be sitting in that beautiful site you saw in London with fast internet, hardwired into the floor, and I was going to be able to depend on that for everything that I did. And then planned staffing levels and hiring strategies, right? Standard stuff that you expect when you go into a new year. 2020. First thing, by March 15th, all of this happened. By March 15th, everybody I knew had been either directly or indirectly impacted by COVID. They'd gotten sick, or in a few cases by March 15th, or they knew somebody who had gotten sick, or they were terrified of getting sick. I had people at the beginning of March saying they didn't want to come into the office anymore because they were worried, right? So everybody was impacted in terms of health and well-being. Teams were no longer working together in co-located sites, right? Those didn't exist. Everybody was working from their own home by March 15th, and nobody in any company had thought through, how are we going to do this, right? Except those who had already moved to full remote. Reasonably predictable marketplace was gone, right? Businesses were shutting down and furloughing everywhere. Relatively stable strategic initiatives, right? No chance. We couldn't drive forward with what we were doing, right? And then reliable infrastructure to support teams and products. No, not only were we all working from home, but everybody in the world was watching Netflix at the same time. So that 70% burst of traffic that Netflix used to get on a Friday night, right? 70% of the internet bandwidth was now being used partially all the time. And half the people were trying to do business on their 20 meg British Telecom Wi-Fi. It was not working. Planned staffing levels, forget about it, right? There were furloughs, there were redundancies. You've all read about it. We all know. So now what if you're still in business? Strategic initiatives changed. In our case, restaurants had closed and were trying to figure out if they could ever reopen. Grocery stores couldn't supply whole cities who were quarantined at home. Hiring froze through furloughs and redundancies, and by March 15th, our entire workforce had to adjust from working from home. So what did we do? We needed to build trust with our customers and partners that we were committed to keeping them in business and keeping them getting food. And we needed to build trust with our leaders to ensure that we were using our limited resources effectively as strategic initiatives changed on a day-to-day basis. So we had to build mechanisms to supply consumers. This is our new strategic initiatives. Supply consumers with needed items by building convenience store optimizations into our products. Our products had never handled a single item in an order being unavailable. The way that it handled it, because we were still young, is if a single item was unavailable, we canceled the order and you reorder. Right now, with large grocery lists being put together through convenience stores, we had to be able to handle the situation where they didn't have one item without blowing the whole order out of the water, or it would completely ruin people's trust and ability to use our service for convenience items. We had to implement contact-free delivery, right? People were still handing bags, talking to each other at the door. We had to put something in place to keep our riders safe, to keep our consumers safe, and to make sure people got food that they knew they could trust. We implemented tablet-free onboarding. So normally when you onboard with Deliveroo, you get a tablet. The tablet has a software on it. Those tablets take a while to build up. They require cost, and there's all sorts of logistics that have to happen. So we literally took our Android app, put it on the web, refactored it over a 2 or 3 week period, and got all of that working on websites so that people could bring their own tablets or use a laptop or do something to be able to take orders through Deliveroo. Brand new from scratch. And we finally created recently a sit-down table service. So as restaurants are opening up again, they can actually use that. So all of that was done between March 15th and July 15th. Now, I just started in January, so I'm not saying that the processes I put in place made this happen, but I also came to a company where the CTO was ex-Amazon, ex-Google, ex-Microsoft, where we have leaders across the company who have the same mindset that I do, and we're already implementing those things. So we were able to do a few things to ensure that we were able to deliver with everybody working from their own home in different regions and having to deliver things faster and more reliably than we've ever had to do before. So what did we do? Well, the first thing we did is we learned our lesson that sometimes growing companies actually need to be able to pivot back and act like a startup, right? So we restructured our teams to deliver and pivot faster. Another long story could be told here, but the way that our teams were structured made us in some ways victims of Conway's law, where your software architecture mirrors your org chart. We could not pivot fast and deliver fast that way. So we broke into objective teams going after goals around specific strategic initiatives. And in order to do that, we had to, well, first we had to move all meetings to remote first and refactor meeting rules. I'm a little out of order here, but this is really important. Not only did we move all meetings to remote first, but we had to refactor all of our rituals around meetings to support that. Hands up symbols, making sure that everybody is on camera, making sure that we have rules around who gets to speak and when, and that everybody can see what's going on. This is what I was getting to next. We had to align the development and delivery schedules for the entire org. Everybody had to be on the same sprint cycle, because if we need to change strategic initiatives and move people around and move teams around doing different things, we needed to have everybody on the same schedule. Didn't mean we changed how they worked. It just meant we changed the cadence at which they delivered sprints. So we implemented that single point of truth for goal and project reporting. Another thing I'd love to talk for an hour about, we actually used Jira really effectively to put all of our strategic initiatives and goals in with all of those components that I talked about, and build reports in Confluence with Jira views that allow us to do all of that pivoting I talked about, where you're looking at red goals and green goals, you're looking at goals tied to this strategic initiative, right? We did this in about 2 weeks. We were able to put everybody in that same reporting structure that I had called out in my plans. We focused conversations to consider the values of all participants and their cultures and communication styles. This was taking what we already did, but then saying we no longer have these bubbles of talkers in Singapore or London or Edinburgh. We now, everybody on the meeting is from a different place. So we, going back to remote first, have to be thinking about the cultural, how things are culturally taken in all these meetings. Ensure that changes and goals to strategic initiatives are transparent and changing. I'm just going to roll through the rest of these so we can get to questions. Focus on at-risk projects regularly with senior leaders, and look for trade-offs wherever possible so that we can deliver faster. Immediately review and refactor projects tied to strategic initiatives that are no longer critical. This has been happening all of the time, right? Things that we thought we were going to do in 2020 were not critical anymore when we were trying to keep restaurant partners in business and keep people fed. Actively manage and review risks. Place more accountability in the hands of the people building products. This goes back to the transparency and having ICs be more accountable and teaching your technologists how to communicate up. Consider unplanned network. These last two or three are considering unplanned network impacts to ensure availability, right? Our plans for how we manage our network change when everybody in the world works from home, right? And all of the infrastructure companies are trying to balance against that. So it's always worth having mechanisms to go and inspect those. Creatively look for cost reductions wherever possible. People leave their contracts in place as if they were still going through 2020, right? You need to have a mechanism to go back and say, oh, well, we were planning on this much bandwidth in April, but nobody's online in April. So we're actually gonna renegotiate that contract. Most of our vendors are wanting to keep us in business, so they're perfectly willing to renegotiate, which helps our bottom line. And then finally, and it's really important, make sure that people are not lost or slipping through the cracks. Right? It's really, really easy when we're remote working from home. You know, not only will people slip through the cracks because you're not seeing them on a daily basis, but they'll also slip through the cracks because they don't like this scenario. Some people love working from home, other people hate it. And you need to sort of know that about your people and create mechanisms to keep them from slipping through the cracks. Wow, that was fast. And I apologize for trying to get through so much of that so fast, but hopefully it was valuable to you guys, and I'm here to answer any questions, and I'd love to talk to anybody who's interested.
Thanks, John. That was really interesting and a lot of content that we've covered there. And apologies to everyone for the sort of technical difficulties we had at the beginning. Technology is great when it works, but that was very, very useful. And we've got a few questions coming in kind of thick and fast at the moment, John. So I'll cover them off kind of one by one. The first one we've got through is actually from Richard, and I'll go through some of the details here. So have you found that different teams need different levels of governance, or at Deliveroo do you try and use the same practices across the board?
Absolutely, and this is why you want the reporting to happen consistently, but the management of the teams to work differently. Mm-hmm. Right? So really mature teams will need less governance. We have teams. We have one team that came from an acquisition that is very, very startup minded. And these guys will just go and they'll do stuff and they don't require any governance and they get it done and they deliver services fast. And we have other teams that are made up of like graduate level engineers, mm-hmm. and they require a lot more. So the trick is to make the reporting consistent and then to coach the people that need help with the reporting to make sure that it's accurate. But then for the engineering managers themselves, to give the teams the attention and the focus and the guidance and the governance that they need to be effective.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. The other one that's just literally come through now at the moment would be if COVID disappeared tomorrow, would you continue to work 100% remote, and particularly why, if that was the case?
So since that question is way above my pay grade, I'll answer for myself. I really like going into the office and seeing my team. I don't necessarily really like paying £6,000 a year to take the train into London every day, but I really do like going into the office and seeing my team. So I would like to see some sort of a hybrid. I don't think that long-term, it's great to never see the people that you work with. And we also still have a lot of complexities to work through in terms of equipment. You know, does everybody have a good chair? We can get lots of ergonomic support, right? All that happens in the office. We haven't really solved for that here yet.
No, I can understand that. We've got another one come through as well in terms of, have you ever come across any disruption of your team that's been very challenging before?
I wish I could ask disruption in what way. Are you saying like before COVID stuff? So before COVID, I went through similar problems with all of the internet busts, right? So I was around for the very first one in 2000. Okay. And we've been through lots and lots of patterns like this. Obviously, I've been through a lot of startups that were acquired. That's always a really interesting rodeo to sit through. And then I've been in large companies that acquired small companies and been part of bringing them on board. So there's all sorts of different sort of disruptions that happen. Not to mention, you know, working with companies. When I was with a company called Pivotal, we would work with companies who had been disrupted, and we would teach them to build software so that they could get back in the game and they could become disruptors.
Fantastic stuff. I've got a question here from Jeremy Burns. How do your process projects and initiatives that have to be cancelled or postponed, in particular, sort of stakeholders who are married to getting them done?
That's I mean, that's a challenge, right? Because first of all, you've got people, you've got tech leads, and you've got product managers who are really invested in the thing that they're building, and they've done all sorts of research to say why the thing that they're building is really important. And they're deeply, as well as the engineers working on it, they're deeply invested in that. So the biggest thing is to really raise up the visibility of the strategic initiatives, right? So people will feel like everything is very top down and you're driving and telling them what to do if they can't see the process of deciding why we're doing what we're doing. So to me, transparency of the strategic initiatives is critical, because even if someone is completely invested in the thing that they're working on and they're asked to pause working on it to work on something else, if they can see that the thing that they're working on is not going to have the impact that this other thing is, then they're more likely to buy into it, even though they'll be frustrated by it. And I would say, I don't think you can do that forever. Like, I don't think you can continue to do that, because then people feel like they're just being thrown around and they're on a rudderless ship. But I think that you can do it in really important situations. You can actually pull people off of something that they're really invested in to work on something else, if you provide the context of how important that is to work on.
Fantastic.
And it always comes back to working backward from the customer, which is something that obviously we all learned from Amazon, right? But is critical, right? You always want to work backward from the customer. And if you're doing that, then it's easier again to talk about what the customer impact of the new thing you're working on is versus the old thing.
Fantastic. We've got time for a few more questions. I've got one here from Doug Johnson. How important is consistency of approach across all your teams at Deliveroo? So, for example, coding standards, tooling, approach to testing, particularly when you either sort of acquire new teams that may have a habit of working differently. So almost kind of what freedoms do you give those teams and how do you manage that?
So Deliveroo is a very egalitarian culture and a very freedom-based engineering culture, right? So we have teams who are tracking what they do in Google Sheets, in Trello, in Jira. We have teams who are writing stuff down on paper or a whiteboard. We have teams using Scrum. We have teams using Kanban. And going back to the question about giving teams different sort of levels of governance, right? The process that they use needs to be a reflection of what they're really capable of delivering at. And that's something that you need a strong engineering manager to help them figure out. But there's a lot of freedom. We have a set of languages that we build on. We have a set of technologies that we build on. But at the end of the day, we really want to create as much freedom as we can for people to solve problems and to create a framework where they can exercise that freedom as much as it possibly makes sense to do so.
Fantastic. We've got one here that's been voted up in terms of people who find remote meetings very different to that of physical ones. Much more questions and responses, and perhaps sometimes dominated by either certain personalities or certain people. Any tips to either avoid this or to take advantage and almost kind of change those kind of meeting dynamics?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that we've done. The first thing is, obviously we went out and found as many articles as we could on good online meeting etiquette, right? Mm-hmm. And found like some good rituals you can put in place to make sure that we go from, in the old meetings, we'd all be in a conference room, there'd be 2-3 people working from home. So you'd make sure that you made time for those people to be able to ask questions. As opposed to everybody being remote, you now need a completely different mechanism to make sure that people can respond. So we looked up quite a few articles and shared a few articles around on the best ways to do it. And then we, as a leadership team, we would talk about like which ones make sense. The other thing is that we use the Google Meets Enhancement Suite, which gives us a lot of things like grid views so that you can see how people are reacting and be sensitive to, oh, it looks like you didn't agree with that, Jim. What do you think? Right? And they also allow for things like hands up and thumbs up. Okay. So that if people are queuing up to ask questions, they can actually, and I think we have that in Zoom as well, you can raise your hand and the moderator can sort of look for those sort of scenarios.
Fantastic. I've got a final one here from Andy Nesling. What was the downside side of restructuring your teams to pivot faster? So the structure you had previously must have brought some advantages. What was kind of do you find any kind of trade-off with that?
Yeah, I mean, it brings a lot of advantages. It's worked. I mean, look at Deliveroo as a product, right? They've built great stuff. Mm-hmm. There are definitely disadvantages to doing this. It has absolutely enabled us, as you can see from the slides. It's enabled us to move fast and deliver fast, but it has come at a price of team cohesion. It's come at a price of people feeling pulled around. And of course, those are not necessarily prices that you want to pay at what's already a very unstable time with a lot of uncertainty, right? Mm-hmm. So there are absolute trade-offs to that. The old system allowed for strongly built teams with dedicated product managers who owned an entire silo or vertical stack, and they could focus on that. A whole new way of measuring operational excellence has to be implemented. So there's definite trade-offs for it.
Fantastic. I suppose, I'm conscious of time, we've got a final question here from Abby Bowman. With the amount of freedom that the development teams are given on managing their own work, how do you easily get the data for the programming report?
So what I do within my group is there's a deadline for updating these statuses. Mm-hmm. I have a review with my group so that I can read through all of them and understand them. And I try to sit back and be the last one to speak. I try to have the leads, the actual leads, both the product managers and the engineers, bar raise, if you will, each other, peer review each other and ask the hard questions themselves. That allows the hard questions to come out. And if somebody is less experienced writing these, they can immediately learn from and get mentored by the people who are more experienced writing these. And it raises the level of everybody's status. Plus it gets it to a point where when the statuses are complete, because I've sat through this process, I now understand what's happening and I have heard those hard questions asked, and I have a better sense of how my leaders are thinking and how I can coach them to be more successful.
Fantastic. I think we're just done on time now, Jon, and I really appreciate your time and the Q&A we've spent today, and particularly the content that you've shared. So really appreciate your time, and everyone else who's joined us live as well. And thanks for bearing with us through the initial kind of technical difficulties, but much appreciated.
It was valuable. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much for your time. Cheers, everyone. Thank you. Take care.